Hey there, this is Judice, and you're listening to a special episode of The Art of Suffering, How Our Mess Becomes God's Message. In St. John's Gospel, Jesus addressing the Pharisees in a heated exchange reveals that he and the Father are one. So Jesus said to them, "When you lift up the Son of Man, then you will realize that I am, and that I do nothing on my own, but I say only what the Father taught me." Jesus then said to those Jews who believed in him, "If you remain in my word, you will truly be my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." As men, the first step to governing our home is allowing Christ to govern it through us in his divine wisdom. Although worldly wisdom that we may possess can provide for temporal needs, it falls severely short for those that are eternal. Every high priest of his domestic church should govern from a place of humility and sincerity that ask God for the same prayer request as Solomon when he was given the kingdom of Israel. "Give your servant, therefore, a listening heart, to judge your people and to distinguish between good and evil."
Third stage, unitive. Because if you're going to govern, you got to govern in union with God, because God needs to govern through you because you're imperfect and he's perfect. And this is how you become the king of your domestic church and participate in the kingship of Jesus Christ. But to do that, you have to know who you are and you have to know who God is. Remember, I told you earlier, a lot of part of my life, I'd say he's God and I'm not, but I really wouldn't I wouldn't live that. I just said it. Well, you have to have self-knowledge, okay? So I'm going to hand on a gift to you, my friend, the priest that died, hand it on to me. In our humanity, we have 4 human needs, regardless of who we are, male or female. We all want to be loved, want to receive love and give it away. We all want to feel like we have worth and value. We all want to feel like we belong to something greater than ourselves. We're made in the image of a triune God. We're made for communion. That's why all this isolation nonsense is so bad. You're not meant to be isolated. You're meant to be in communion with people in your very design. And you want to have something that separates you, some defining characteristic that separates you from everybody else. You know, every human person I ever met wants these 4 things. And when we're not feeling loved, when we're not feeling like we have worth or value or belonging or autonomy, we forget who we are. And then we start acting out. We do things that we think make us lovable to other people, think give us worth and value, think make us belong, and we think give us an identity we can cling to. And we forget who we are. And we live a lie. We create roles in our masculinity and femininity instead of discovering them. And we create ourselves in our image and our likeness rather than doing what God has already done for us. The amount of pride in that is insane. But we act like we have a right to do it. So you have to know yourself. So I'm going to turn it on you. And when you were doing the discussion part, you can think about this too. You can take it to prayer. So I don't know about you, but I'm a perfectionist and a control freak. So my woundedness comes in that. So since that's my woundedness, I would live my life from that place for a long time. And I thought if I did certain things from that wound, I could be lovable. I could have worth and value. I could belong. And I had an identity, right, about myself. I don't know your wound, but you have one. So be honest with yourself. What is it? If you can't be honest with yourself, you certainly can't enter into the purgative way or the illuminative way. God can't teach somebody who's so prideful they can't admit their own faults, right? So what do you do that you perceive makes you lovable? What do you do that you perceive gives you value? What do you do that you perceive gives you belonging to some community outside of just yourself? And what do you do that you perceive gives you an autonomy or an identity, right? You know, like if you'd asked me, like those men did when I sat down at that table so many years ago for the first time, they asked me that question. It just kept stumping me, right? They kept saying, "Who are you and who is God?" And when they asked me who I was, I give them a bio, right? Oh, I'm a teacher. I'm a husband. I'm a father. In high school, I was a basketball player. I was a boyfriend. I was, in college, I was kind of a ladies' guy. When I lost my identity in basketball because I didn't play basketball anymore, tell you what, maybe now that I'm an award-winning author and a Catholic speaker and the director of Catechetics, maybe that's who I am. No. So I kept getting that answer wrong. Those are things that I do, and things that you do don't define who you are. But when people ask us that question, the first thing we tell them is all these things we've done. And we subconsciously think that's what gives us our ability to be loved, our ability to have worth, our ability to belong, and our ability to have an identity. And sometimes we just need like a good friend like Father Joe to come along and remind us that that's not the case. Now, I don't know how many of you guys have seen this movie. It's one of my favorite, The Lion King, right? If you've seen the original movie, The Lion King, I didn't realize that Disney was making money off the story of salvation history, but they really are. See, because Rafiki is a priest and he's anointing Simba in his baptism to be the heir to the throne of his father, Mufasa. And then as Simba's growing up, kind of like in the garden, he's only told one place in the kingdom he can't go, the elephant graveyard. There's only one tree you can't eat from. You can eat from all the other ones. And he goes there in disobedience. And then instead of a snake slithering up, it's Scar, his uncle, right? Who's jealous because he'll never have the kingship. Unlike Satan, he just was not born in the right lineage to be able to do it, but he'll still never have it, even though Satan forfeited it, right? And then he goes and he asks him, he kind of tricks him, doesn't he, into going into the graveyard. And then what happens after the elephant graveyard when Simba literally falls into the elephant graveyard? He runs around with all these other animals trying to figure out who he is that have no characteristics of the role of a lion in the essence or nature of what he is. And he's trying to create his identity instead of embracing the one that he's supposed to discover. And then eventually he runs into Rafiki, and Rafiki reminds him of who he really is.
Creepy little monkey. Will you stop following me? Who are you?
The question is, who are you?
I thought I knew. Now I'm not so sure.
Well, I know who you are. Shh, come here. It's a secret.
Enough already. What is that supposed to mean, anyway?
It means you're a baboon, and I'm not.
I think you're a little confused.
Wrong. I'm not the one who's confused. You don't even know who you are.
Oh, and I suppose you know.
Sure do. You're Mufasa's boy. Bye.
Hey, wait! You knew my father?
Correction. I know your father.
I hate to tell you this, but he died a long time ago.
Nope. Wrong again. He's alive, and I'll show him to you. You follow old Rafiki. He knows the way. Come on. Don't dawdle. Hurry up!
Hey, whoa, wait.
Come on. Come on.
Would you slow down?
Stop! Look down there.
That's not my father. It's just my reflection.
No. Look hard. You see, he lives in you.
Simba, you have forgotten me.
No. How could I?
You have forgotten who you are, and so forgotten me. Look inside yourself, Simba. You are more than what you have become. You must take your place in the circle of life.
How can I go back? I'm not who I used to be.
Remember who you are. You are my son, and the one true king. Remember who you are.
No! Please! Don't leave me!
Remember.
Father!
Remember.
Don't leave me.
I think sometimes we forget that. Romans 8, verse 14 through 19. For the Spirit itself testifies, right, that we are children of God. For those who are children of God are led by the Spirit of God. We did not receive a spirit of slavery to fall back into fear in the new covenant. We received the spirit of adoption, that we might cry out, Abba, Father. For the Spirit itself testifies that we are children of God. And if we're children of God, then we're co-heirs of Christ. And if co-heirs, then heirs of Christ. We must first suffer with him in order to be glorified with him. When you tell people what you do, you never answer the question who you are. You are a child of God. And when you realize that, you can receive love freely and give it away. You can understand that you were created for a specific purpose that only you can fulfill, and that you belong to God and God alone, and that is your worth and your value. My friend cries out from the grave every day for me to fulfill a promise I made to him in our last conversation before he died. I promise you, Father Joe, I'll share the gift that you share with me that set me free with as many people that are willing to hear it. And as you fathered me spiritually in the role in the ministerial priesthood that God specifically designed for you to do, now it will empower me through divine wisdom to govern my home as the high priest of my home, as a father, when I'm grounded in knowing who I am and who God really is. And when you have a kid who is imperfect in a situation you can't control, and you're a perfectionist and a control freak, and you have to wake up every day in the morning and look yourself in the mirror and go, you gonna try to do this by yourself? Or you're gonna give it to somebody or someone who'll do it for you? I said, yes, that was my fiat. What's yours? I don't try to carry my cross by myself. I'll let Jesus do it because it's way too big for me. This becomes habitual when cooperating with sanctifying grace, to abandon pleasure and embrace what is difficult. Not for my good, but for the good of other. And this is the ultimate act of love, and it does bear fruit. This doesn't comply with the culture, especially in America. It's countercultural. But we say rightly, the one church Jesus Christ establishes, one holy, Catholic, and apostolic. Holy means set apart. It will set you apart when you conform your life to this. Not only in the world, but in your home. As a leader for your wife or your future spouse, your children or your future children. And to do this on a daily basis, you have to do it grounded in truth. Who's a person, someone, not something. I've been to several man-to-man conferences, right? That keep telling me the same things I've been telling you this morning, like you need to be a high priest of the home, but they don't ever give you a blueprint for how to do this. Somebody told me I ought to write a book, and I still might do that. I've written 3 already, but there's one already written that does that. It's called Terror of Demons. He talks about the domestic church in chapter 7. And it really affirms something I've discovered in my job. So I'm going to lay this out for you. See, Christian Smith is a sociologist, and he's a convert to the Catholic faith. He works at Notre Dame University in the United States, and he did he kind of like measured, like I mentioned earlier, this radical statistic, right? Like 85% of kids that get confirmed at 17 within 7 years leave the Catholic Church. And he wanted to know why that was. So he went to all these different socioeconomic and ethnic backgrounds, and he followed kids from the times they were very small to the time they got to be 17, when they were going through the sacramental process, where they had received baptism, first communion, first reconciliation, and eventually got confirmed. And in his research, he had thought that when he was doing his research, he would discover that the kids that stayed Catholic post-confirmation, they had a youth minister or a priest or a religion teacher or, somebody influential in their life in the spiritual realm that was the biggest influence on them staying Catholic. But what the data revealed was just the opposite. It revealed that the most influential people on the kids that actually stayed Catholic were their parents. And the way their parents practiced the faith or lacked a practice of faith. So like Fulton Sheen is of great inspiration to me from the magisterium. I said earlier that the best argument for Catholicism is Catholics. The best argument against it is Catholics. So he's a great inspiration in the magisterium for me. And the greatest scandal in the history of the magisterium is Theodore McCarrick. So as a parent, I had a choice. I could be an inspiration or a scandal to my kid. And without my cross, I'm pretty sure, based on the way I had been raised and the way I lived my life prior to this, I'd be a scandal today instead of an inspiration. And that's really important because data shows that when the man is the first person to have a spiritual conversion in the home and live his faith, there's a 93% retention rate for everybody in that house staying in the Catholic faith. When the woman's the first person to do it because she had to usurp something that her husband failed to do because he was too effeminate, it drops to 17%. Now, of course, there are times when you have an abusive husband or like it's just a bad guy and you're in a bad situation. Of course, the women have to do it. And there are exceptions, but the exception is not an exception to the rule. It proves the rule. The way you live your faith as a father and the way you live your life spiritually as a father from boyhood to fatherhood is going to determine the way your child, your daughter, or your son will live their faith as an adult. That's not me speaking. That's stats speaking that from people that have been polled about this. And you see this secular data actually points to the truth revealed in divine revelation all the way back in Genesis that I talked about earlier. The concept of egalitarianism is inherently evil, yet communists preach this stuff. I taught civics and American history for 13 years before I got into a theology classroom. My degree's in secondary education social studies. I used to teach about political ideology and how it gets implemented in countries to manipulate large groups of people into ideology. Egalitarianism is a mark of socialism, which is inherently, according to Karl Marx, the first step to communism, which has failed everywhere miserably where it's been implemented. It's evil because it is not how God ordained the relationship between the man and the woman. God created each of us with a nature. We have a design, we have desires, and we have a destiny. Christopher West talks about that, TOB. He's right. And in the same way, you cannot domesticate a wild animal. You cannot force men and women into equal roles. The results will be what they have been in society: divorce, perversion, sexual immorality, broken homes, depression, and suicide. When we don't know who we are and we live in disorder, we can never find peace until we find who we are and live in order. And remember, Jesus said, the peace I give you is not the peace the world gives you. My peace I give you. Those are two different things. And sometimes I think we conflagrate those two things in our fallen nature. And they're distinctly different. Philosophically, they're different. Now, to show you my objectivity, I'm going to quote somebody who I'm going to, for the record, since this is being taped, I completely disagree with. And I condemn his heterodoxy and his heresy as a priest of the Catholic Church. Richard Rohr. But he had a good point. And people that are objective in their thinking, they can actually take somebody they disagree with and admit when they make a good point. In fact, that's a sign I use to determine whether or not to listen to what somebody has to say or not. Are you willing to look at somebody you completely disagree with and admit that they made a good point and that it may have some validity? That's intellectual integrity. That's another thing that's been lost in this country. We don't argue anymore. We like demonize people. Communists do that. They don't respond to arguments. They demonize character because they don't have a better argument. Here's 5 steps of any ancient practice of male initiation into a community or society in manhood. Okay. Number 1, life is hard. You can't be effeminate and live in a world where it's hard, according to Thomas Aquinas, who's a lot smarter than me. You're not that important. My son taught me that. My son also taught me my life is not about me. He also taught me I'm not in control. And the fact that I've been willing to die to myself spiritually has made embracing my physical death at some point in my life a lot more comforting. Memento mori, huh? It's Latin. Remember death. It's the universal language of the church. That's still the case today. That never changed. Memento mori. Remember death. In every moment, remember, you're going to die one day. And you're going to answer for everything that you've done. See Romans 2, verse 7 and 8. Egalitarianism strikes at the heart of justice. God is mercy, but he's also merciful in his justice. When we choose something other than him, he gives us what we chose in our own will. Not him, something else. And for the record, people damn themselves to hell. God doesn't damn anybody to hell when they choose something other than him. He honors our free will, right? And there is a hell, and there are people in it, despite what you might hear from some folks nowadays. So I'm going to close with a personal story. My wife, as I mentioned earlier, just retired in February of this year from 21 years of working in the neonatal unit of a hospital because we had a child 13 years ago who I had to work 2 jobs to provide for because the insurance companies in my state, in the United States, that were supposed to provide for somebody with pre-existing conditions had a lot of bureaucratic hoops we had to jump through and things that make it almost impossible for you to get help. So that it's much easier just to kill the kid instead of bringing them into the world. She should have been home 13 years ago, but she couldn't. So she actually had a reason to go to work. She just retired. I have a 7-year-old son who's probably the neediest of all 3 of my kids, which is saying a lot based on the fact that I have a kid who can't do 90% for himself every day what you and I do for ourselves. And unless you're living that or experienced it, I love you, but you don't have a clue what that's like. And what it draws out of you when you're trying to do it. And I only need to hear her say one thing to know that she regrets working for 20 years. When my 7-year-old now has things available at school that she was never able to go to because she was at work. And they told her she could have a career and be a mom. And I lived it. Nope, didn't happen. She says, I'm so glad I'm not working today. I finally am able to go. She doesn't need to say anything else to me. The most heroic thing you can do is allow Christ to master you so that the father of lies of this world doesn't. And I conclude with what St. Paul said in Galatians. If I boast of anything, it must be of nothing but the cross of Jesus Christ, because I can say this and mean it, through which the world has been crucified to me and I to the world. Are you conforming to Christ's image and likeness? Are you allowing him to conform you to his, or are you taking him and trying to conform him to yours? The answer to that question determines the priest, prophet, and king, the high priest of the domestic church, the man that all studies show you'll be. And if you don't, well, the world has given us a great definition of the kind of man we're going to be. At some point, I had to just let go of what I had always believed and thought would be, and began to accept what actually was.
Chad has learned the value of family and what it truly means to be a dad, and the importance of being present.
Initially, my personal experience in waiting for Eli was a validation of my Catholicism. However, while growing into the guy who was destined to share this story, the reality is that the objective truth of the Catholic faith is what actually validated that experience.
Before Eli, Chad was really just starting to look at the faith and seriously consider just kind of committing to his Catholic faith. And he really began to adopt some of the Christian principles that we learn in our Catholic faith. After Eli came, it required that he begin to start living out those Christian principles.
Chad and I were and still are in a faith community together. We sit down and break bread sometimes and share our lives and our journey as Christians. And it's just been really good to see Chad move from seeing the world from inside out rather than seeing it from outside in, and putting the things around him first.
I think he's grown. He's learned to stop and smell the roses.
Every step I took toward Eli and away from the world was a step into the grace that would set the pace for me becoming the husband, the father, the teacher, and the man that God created me to be.
I gave my all.
The journey through each stage of spiritual maturation is not free from the pains of the cross. Being willing to do the hard thing and embrace a cross takes any man from spiritual infancy into spiritual adulthood. In his classic work, The Three Conversions of the Spiritual Life, Father Reginald Garrigrou Lagrange lays out 3 stages that mirror the conversion of the apostles. An initial call to follow Jesus and abandon an old way of life. The second, marked by one's reception of the invitation of our Lord to actively participate in the Paschal Mystery. And finally, eradicating all ego from the soul in its final union with Him, like the apostles after Pentecost. Please share this video. Like, subscribe, and leave a comment. If you'd like to invite me to share this talk or speak on any other topic at an event, check out my books, shoot me a message on social media, or visit my website at chadjudice.com. And remember, we must boast most gladly in our weaknesses so that the strength of Christ might be with us. When we're weak, we're really strong, because it takes a Good Friday to leave behind who the world says we should be in order to rise with Jesus Christ on Easter Sunday as the men He created us to be. Saints, God love you, and we'll see you next time.